In the spirit of reconciliation, we acknowledge the traditional custodians of country throughout Australia and their connection to land, sea, and community. We pay our respects to their elders, past and present, and extend that respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples today.
Hi, this is Materialise, the Launch Tabletop podcast, where we talk about turning game ideas into tangible objects. Today is the 24th of February 2023, and this is episode 16. This week's topic is the financial side of game design. Oh, we've got a picture up because we didn't do things right. Press the wrong button, of course. Let's go to this view, hey? So, welcome everyone. It wouldn't be a Materialise episode without some level of technological or human error, and we've already done that, so we know more for the rest of the episode, okay?
Tick the box.
That's what happens when you put me in the driving seat. Yeah.
No, I don't think that was your fault. I think it was mine.
No, I clicked that by accident.
Oh, that was okay. Fine. If you're going to take the blame, then I'll let you have it. That's fine.
Sure.
So hi, I'm Eris, and I'm your host. And this week I'm joined by Alana. Hello, Alana.
Hello, I'm back.
It's been quite a while since you've been on the episode.
Hiatus. Yeah,
welcome
good
back.
to be back.
How's your
Thank
week
you.
been?
Week has been good. Yeah, just plugging away at things as usual. Behind
I
the
hear it's been
scenes.
hot up there in Queensland. Or
It's
just normal.
not as bad as it has been. This week
Okay.
has actually been quite mild.
Okay.
The week before was horrendously hot and muggy and gross.
Yep.
But no, this week is much more agreeable.
Awesome. And we also have Alan back with us. Hello, Alan.
Hello.
How you doing?
Yeah, good.
And you're not too like you're in the same general geography as Alana. I know you're like
Yeah.
an hour or more away, but like you're kind of in the same.
Yeah.
Well, we timed it. It's actually, 38 minutes on a good day?
Depending on traffic. I don't think the weather has the same problem with traffic though, so it's pretty consistent.
Fair call. And our special guest this week is Matt Dunstan. Hi, Matt.
Hey, hi, Eris. Hi, everyone. Thanks for having me.
Welcome. And I hear that you're back in Australia from living in Europe for a number of years.
I am. I'm in Newcastle, in New South Wales. So it's nice to be back. It's been quite rainy this week.
Okay. Yeah, actually,
not too hot.
I'm in Sydney, so about what 2? Is it 2 hours?
About 2 hours, yeah.
Yeah, south of Newcastle, and it's been definitely rainy, and I've quite liked it. Although I did forget, and I went to a board game group the first time going to this group on Tuesday night, and it was like pouring with rain, and my mum called me while I'm driving. She's like, "Just remember, I've hidden an umbrella in your passenger side compartment of your car," and I was like, "Yeah, thanks, mum, thanks," because I'm like lost trying to get to this place, and then I get there and I'm like, I don't need the umbrella, and so I just like got saturated going to this like venue. But that's all right. All right, so I would introduce Matt, so people who may not know you. So where am I going? I wasn't even on the right part of my screen. Matthew is a designer of numerous high-profile games, including Elysium, which I have, just there behind me, Chocolate Factory, Echoes, Monumental, and the Adventure Game series. He's also one half of Postmark Games, who make print and play games. But you've done heaps of games. I think you got like over 60 things on Board Game Geek, and I don't know if that's like how many base games that is, and if a lot of them are like expansions or promos or whatever, but. You've got a lot.
There were even before Postmark, I was part of a different kind of print and play thing called Good Games, and we did like 6 or 7 games which we uploaded. So they let you upload anything onto BGG. So the number. I'm just padding my numbers at this point.
Have you done a statistics ranking to see like what percentile in terms of all the designers, number of published games? Have you done like
that? Would require me to understand how to use the BGG database, which unfortunately is beyond my. But it would. I remember this isn't the same, but I remember Daniel Solis. I'm not sure if everyone knows Daniel Solis is a fantastic game designer and a graphic designer. He did a Twitter thread once, sort of talking about like Twitter followers, and I think if you have like 1,000 followers or more, you're already in like the top 1% of all Twitter users or something. Yeah, I mean, I don't know if this was like 5 or 6 years ago, but
I hope
there
it's still true,
are so many small accounts.
because I've had my Twitter account since 2008, I think, and just sheer luck more than anything else, I've got I don't know, about 1,000 or 1,200 or something followers on there. But doesn't mean that most of them, I think, are people who never talk to me, so it's not exactly meaningful engagement. But it's like, oh, cool, I could be in the top something %. That's interesting. Because numbers matter, right? That's all that matters. Is just stats.
Exactly. Well, things. I mean, we're in the week where the BGG number 1 has been dethroned. I mean, that's the
not
most
even
important
in the
number
loop.
of all.
Who got to throw? What's the story there?
Well, it was Gloomhaven, which I think has been sitting there for 5 or 6 years or something,
long time.
and it's been dethroned by Brass Birmingham of all games, which I think was number 2 previously.
Yeah. And Brass Birmingham, is that the original Brass?
No, that's the rebranded, but it's also the new because it's Lancashire is the original.
Lancashire's the original. Yep.
And Birmingham's the new one with beer. But yes, I think there was I mean, as controversies go, it's a very small controversy. But then I think once the news comes out, a whole bunch of people rate the other game 1 to
as a popularity context, right? You put the power of internet with trolls and things happen.
Yeah, I mean, I think in aggregate it's not too bad, but yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Sorry, I just saw a comment. I'm going to circle back. Kate is not able to be with us on the show today, but she's popping in the comments when able, and she's told me to always listen to my mum, and I should listen to my mum. You're right. And we have Jay with us. Hello, Jay.
Hey, Jay.
Hi, Jay.
I actually had the pleasure of not working with Jay, but I think I helped mentor. There's this thing on Facebook which I signed up for. I have no idea how I signed up for it. And it just sort of
through Tabletop Game Design of Australia, they've got a mentor program. I think that's the one you're referring to.
That must be because I just get messages out of nowhere. There's no context to it. But I've met a couple. I've done it 2 or 3 times now with various Australian designers. And it's been fun.
Did you also work with Tegan? Yeah. Did you work with Tegan Smith?
That was through the official.
That's a different one. Okay.
The cardboard editors. No, it wasn't cardboard editors. Okay. What are they called? They were the tabletop mentorship program, whatever.
Okay.
But actually, it was very. I feel sorry for Tegan if Tegan's listening. I was a terrible mentor, and we couldn't quite figure out the time difference very well because I was still in the UK at the time.
Well, it's going to be easier
Tegan,
now,
I think, has succeeded well without my help. Probably
Tegan's
done better
doing
without
fantastic,
me. So.
But yeah. But she's in Canberra, so you're both in the same time zone now, so you can easily sort stuff out.
That's true. No, it would be good. Well, I'm hoping to meet. Well, and it was a pity I didn't go to CanCon, but I'm hoping to meet a lot of people.
Yeah, I'm still salty you didn't turn up to CanCon, Matthew. I was like, I'm going to finally meet Matthew in person, and we've been friends for years online, and so to see what happens. But then you're like, oh no, I'm not going to come. So I forgive you though, despite my attitude. I do actually forgive you. It's all good.
Oh, thank you.
But if you can go next year, it is absolutely for Australian designers. It and PAX Australia are the 2 that I would highly recommend trying to get to if you're an Aussie designer, because a lot of other people go to them, and it's good to hang out and play test and all that kind of stuff. We also have Lee in the chat. Hello, Lee. All right, so I think we'll move into the actual start of the proper show, if I can get my notes. So, Matthew, over the last number of years, you've created a Twitter thread. I don't know how many years you've been doing it, maybe 3 years or 2?
I think I did. I used to stream, would you believe? And I think the very first year I did it via stream, but then the next 2 years I did it via Twitter, so it's been 3 years basically.
Okay, and in this Twitter thread you cover your earnings basically in royalties and stuff for that last 12 months, and you share real numbers, which is a really big deal because obviously a lot of people don't normally share that, and it's not stuff that we get data on for outsiders. And so if people listening, if you want to go to Twitter, I highly recommend, let me find the banner thing, I highly recommend you follow Matthew, who is Wise Goldfish on Twitter, and find the thread. It's near the top. And we'll be talking about it today, so it might be a good reference for you to find it and chat about it today. And I think I may have even stuck it in the description for this stream, so if you're watching on YouTube, you can probably check the description box and it should be there. It may even be there on the Facebook stream as well. I'm trying to get better at being organised, everyone. It's not always happening, but I'm trying. So if you go to Wise Goldfish on Twitter and have a look, the thread breaks down Matt's earnings, and you do a fancy pie chart, which is always special to see, the breakdown via a graphic. So I guess the first question I want to start with is, what prompted you to do this? Like, what prompted you to start talking about this stuff openly and not just keeping it to yourself in the first? Yeah.
Yeah, I think I've been designing games for almost a decade now, actually. My first published game came out 10 years ago, would you believe, which makes me feel a bit old. And of course, in those early days, you have one game. It's not very interesting, really. Like, you get a few payments throughout the year, okay. But I think as I went on, it becomes more, I guess, interesting and possibly useful for people. But the thing that really prompted me was probably much more in the digital game space. There are a couple of great folks who I follow, one of which is Arnold Rowers from Tiny Touch Tales. So if people know the game Card Crawl, for example, on iOS or other games like that.
Fantastic.
I'm actually a small plug, because I actually this year I got to work with Arnold, and we released I co-designed a game which has been released with him called Card Crawl Adventure. But he
you worked on that? Cool.
Yeah, we co-designed it. So Arnold and I co-designed that.
Yeah,
game,
I'll be like the game.
Oh, thanks. And he would always do this at the end of every year. I think he's done it for at least 5 or 6 years. And I'd really recommend checking out Arnold. I'll find the link when someone else is talking, put it in the chat. And he has it on his blog. But again, it's just very transparent. And actually, in his case, it's even easier because he, as a digital developer, he is the company. He has all the numbers. There's no sort of confidentiality problems. Like, he controls everything. He can see all the back end of how many sales and revenue, etc. And he shares all of that basically in a very matter-of-fact way. And I think, and I've probably picked up other examples, but again, always in the digital game space. And I sort of thought, well, yeah, I just modeled what I do off him. And I think I just did it in Twitter because I found the prospect of writing one tweet at a time is a lot less scary than writing a whole blog article. Like maybe it's not as good to read, I don't know, but I've done it a couple of years and had pretty good reaction for that. And I think I guess the other kind of source of that a little bit is Cardboard Edison, which hopefully folks have heard about. They've done a lot of work to try and collate a lot of data about royalties, about advances, a lot of stuff about the industry, and trying to collate that from a lot of different designers or a lot of different companies and release that in sort of infographics. So I'd really recommend, checking out their infographics there. I think they're freely available at their website. And that same sense of, they, for example, were trying to gather details of contracts from designers. Designers could submit, sort of answer a questionnaire about a contract anonymously, so that, you wouldn't be able to link a particular game to a particular contract. And then they collated all that to get a lot of data. And I did that for a few years. And I thought that was really useful. So I think it's just all trying to, combine to a place where we just have a bit more information, because really right now, I don't think anybody really knows what designers are making, especially freelance designers. There aren't a lot of freelance designers really, or like full-time freelance designers in the industry. Also, they're mostly all white men, such as myself. And of course, this disparity in finances, disproportionately affects those from other backgrounds, from minorities who don't have the, I had, and I said in other parts of the thread, but, I basically got to do game designing as a hobby for 10 years and I didn't make any money, or I made very little money. And so now it looks very impressive, but, it was sort of built on 10 years of just having the time and the ability to just pursue that without having to make a living wage. And so I'm not saying that this really solves anything, but hopefully it's like one little brick in a wall that might improve that. I don't know.
Well, it certainly helps raise the level of transparency, so that then designers and publishers can talk and have a bit more kind of confidence that they sort of have some information from other parties. You're talking about publicly, like talking about finances, and I just remembered while you're talking that I think Steve Jackson Games used to release a financial kind of thing every year, even though they're a private company, like it wasn't a shareholder one from memory, but I think they were one that used to do it years ago, but I don't know if they shared actual numbers or just more like percentages. I can't remember. But I
I
remember
think they were pretty good. I think they were fairly detailed. You're right. I think they were,
Yeah.
and I'm trying to remember. There must be a few other companies.
Tasty
Bruno,
Minstrel Games did it as well, but I think it was like 2 times. But one of the reasons was also they were doing equity fundraising, I think, at one
I
point.
see.
But the other time that they were fairly open about their sort of finances until they're no longer around. But I love
Yeah,
Tasty Minstrel
unfortunately.
Games. Yeah, it's probably culturally the closest to the style of games that Rule and Make sort of was making back then. Yeah.
Oh, we've got some hot information in the chat, so I'll reveal it now.
Jay.
Jay, I'm happy to reveal my earnings. It's $0. I believe I'm in the 90% percentile. Yeah,
Actually,
I think
no,
people-
you're actually in the top because most people are on the negatives. They spend more money
Yes.
than
Oh
they earn.
boy.
Yeah, yeah.
Isn't that the truth? I must confess I've not kept good financial records of what I've spent on like prototypes and things like that over the years, but I think it probably would definitely outweigh any earnings that I've made.
Well, I didn't want to throw shade on Jade's, but he does say earnings. He hasn't revealed any expenses, so.
True.
Yes, I do.
Yeah,
I don't want to reveal my costs.
that's gross, not net. Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you,
Yeah.
Jay.
If I could interject for a second, so from a publisher's perspective, when Alan and I were running Rule and Make, it was difficult for us to kind of really find good information around what we should be paying our designers as well. Like that was something that information is not just, it's not readily available, and when you have designers unclear about what their time is worth and what their designs are worth, and publishers who aren't super cluey on what they should be paying designers, it kind of creates this almost like a bit of an impasse, and it's like someone just eventually has to throw some number out, and someone says, I guess that's about right, and then and then we all continue on thinking that seems okay. So yeah, having that info that you're putting out really does help put a bit more perspective into the open for everybody, I think too.
Yeah, no, and you're right. I've had actually publishers in the last few years contact me, especially newer publishers, and just ask, like, they're not even that I'm working with them, that they've said, here's a contract we're thinking of sending to like our first designer we're working with. Does it look kind of because there aren't? Yeah, you're right. There's just not a lot of standards out there. There, in the German kind of gaming world, there's SAZ, the Spielautoren. It's kind of like almost like a union for game designers, I guess, and publishers are also part of it. And they have like standard contract templates. They have a lawyer that designers can, if you're a member, you pay like, I don't know how much the fees are, like €100 a year or something. You have access to a lawyer through them. They kind of do some collective bargaining with publishers sometimes in terms of like royalty rates, or at least they you have a network to discuss these things. And I've definitely thought a couple of times, and I was talking with Jeffrey Allers, who's an American game designer but lives in Germany and has seen as member of SAZ and how useful it is. We keep talking about, well, it would be great to have a more English-speaking focused sort of body that might help that, but haven't done it yet. But I completely understand you. There's a lot of well-meaning people. Unfortunately, there are a few, very small, but there are some bad actors, and it just makes it difficult, when nobody has. And I think even there's some outdated information, like for example, you hear 5% as royalties as this kind of like, it's just thrown out there as this sort of standard number, but it's not really true anymore, because Kickstarter, for example, has changed a lot of things. Manufacturing has changed, and even just like there are more complexities that go beyond 5%, and I think this is too simplistic an answer.
Yeah, as a good example is that when you say 5%, you don't actually know how the calculations are based on, whether or not it also accounts for, like, for example, when a game is nearing sort of end of life, or on the end tails, you sometimes would do like a massive liquidation, and are you is there any protection for the designers to say that, well, there's a minimum sort of threshold and a maximum threshold, and minimum, this is how much you'll get. When you say 5%, all of those details are not considered, You also don't consider things like advances and bonuses and re-signing. So there's all these other things that really change. Like 5% is almost meaningless when you sort of account for all the additional details that you need to sort of throw in. Yeah.
And even on the
I've
most
also-
basic level, actually, you don't know. Don't worry about liquidation, but is it 5% of MSRP? Is it 5%
Yeah.
of distribution price? Is it 5% of manufacturing? You know, a lot of publishers have different models for that. So, and if you're a new designer, you don't know all that sort of stuff. You know, you don't have a point of reference. So it's very
Yeah.
Yeah.
It
It's
came up
definitely
recently in one of
fraught.
the.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Oh, so I was just going to say it's fraught because you're trying to find an agreeable middle ground for both sides. Because if, as a publisher, if you are a little too unconstrained, I guess, with the way you word your contracts, it can come back to bite you later on. Like you got to find that happy medium where the designer gets sort of is compensated fairly, and a publisher doesn't like shoot themselves in the foot and suddenly owe a ridiculous amount of money because they had a runaway success and just can't afford it. So it's definitely fraught.
And I think like I had a game designer friend a few months ago who was about to sign a game, and so they messaged a few of us who were their friends and kind of go, can you look over the contract and just kind of tell me, you know, is there something I should be asking? Is there, you know, what are fair rates and all that kind of stuff? And I feel like the consensus sort of came, or at least my consensus, I can't speak for everyone, but the way I interpret it is that we all have different amounts that make sense for us. So for some people, they've got a full-time job already and game design is their hobby, so they're okay with a lower royalty because they're just happy to get the game made, and especially if they're working with a small publisher who's starting out and, you know, doesn't have tons of capital as well, then they might go, yeah, sure, I'm happy to accept a lower initial, you know, amount because I'm just happy to have this happen and be a part of it. But then other people, it's like, you know, like what Matthew's doing now, like it's your full-time job, so you've got to, you know, like take that into consideration as well. And then that's not including anything like, do you have already existing games that are published and doing well that you know, like, so there's some level of reputation or like experience that you might, you know, be getting paid for as well, and all that kind of stuff. And so I think that's why sometimes the hard when people go, oh, it's definitely 5% is the right thing or whatever the number is, I don't think it's quite that simple. I think there definitely is a personal like element to what it's your comfort level. But I think that an important takeaway is if you're not happy with the offering from the publisher, then you have the right to say no. Like, you don't have to sign the contract.
Or in fact, negotiate. I mean,
negotiate.
You know,
that's right. Yeah.
I mean, much like in real life and with jobs, you know, there's a reticence for folks to negotiate effectively. And I think I've definitely had several conversations with new designers and just pointing out, you know, if a publisher has got to the point where they've evaluated your game and they want to publish it, you know, they've actually already invested a certain amount in that game. They've invested a certain amount of time. They have a lot of other things they could be doing. And it's not to say that you should take advantage of that, but, you know, you have some room to at least negotiate or at least ask, you know, and then they can come back, you know, you can have a discussion. Don't feel like I think a lot of newer designers, they're sort of, and I understand, like, you want a game published, you'll take anything you can get, and it can appear like very competitive and difficult. But something far worse is to sign a bad contract as your first game, and there are other designers who, you know, who had this experience, and I think, you know, they would say, I'd much prefer that I hadn't had that first game published at all, rather than having that bad experience. So, you know, I think there are, you know, you have to be cautious, but also feel like you have the power to negotiate and things like that.
Yeah, Kate just said there's so many different circumstances that need to be taken into account, and that's true for both, like the publisher and the designer.
So I have a Oh, sorry. Yeah.
That's right. I'll just read. Kate also said, personal circumstances aside, the difference in the level of completion, so development and art direction, also makes an enormous difference. So yeah, like what is the thing you're actually offering the publisher, and what are they what are they taking?
I want to throw a scenario to you, Matthew. I don't know whether it's come up before or not, but as a publisher, we were looking at licensed IPs basically to base a game on, and because there is already a royalty component with licensing, when you sort of add the designer royalties on top, and then you sort of do your normal sort of calculations with how much you sell it for distribution prices, and if you're using a distribution consolidator and all that. Anyway, basically what I'm saying is that because there is percentage on top of percentage, it gets really the margins get really thin, right? So one of the ways that we publishers, well, at least we sort of thought of was, okay, well, let's instead think about design, like doing more designer for hire, and actually front load the cost more on the development side. So we're saying, okay, this is more like, oh, we're getting a designer, paying a designer outright, and do the calculations at the front, because then after sales, then we just have to worry about royalty fees with the IP license holder. So for you as a designer, do you have any sort of opinions about sort of someone approaching you to say, okay, there are no royalties, but we're going to pay you up front, and it's going to be a lot to buy your design out, versus sort of the more sort of traditional model?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I've done now my first IP game, which I hope will be announced this year, I think. And it's actually quite common that you actually get paid a lower percentage of royalties when you do that. And in this case, I think the percentage royalty is 3% that I get on this game. I got a bit of a higher advance because it's it is work for hire. You're basically doing that more work. So I did get a higher advance. I think in this case it was 2,500 American dollars, which is probably slightly higher than normal. But I think, yeah, and my personal take might be different. I think this particular question really does depend on the individual, because ultimately you hope that you're getting compensated for your time, however you value it, and that sort of thing. I personally prefer having royalties to an upfront fee for a couple of reasons. One is I'm a bit more invested in the whole game process, and as a sort of a mathematical point, I would much prefer to have, it's not quite the same, but sometimes I think games are like throwing darts at a dartboard. I'd like to throw a lot of darts rather than a couple of very big darts, if that makes sense. And I only need one of them to do well to sort of kind of pay for all the other darts. And I think royalty is the way that you can do that. Of course, I think you also have to determine a little bit about what you think the project is really going to be. I mean, a lot of these Kickstarter projects, for example, are a little bit one and done. And so, you can kind of go, okay, well, royalties aren't going to be so important in this case. You can think about just literally how much work it's going to be, because then that will tell you, well, how much money do you really need up front to sort of make sense? Because of course the publisher may never make the game. So you want to sort of cover that time you're going to put into that. So it kind of scales on the complexity of the game and things like that. And I think the final thing is that I personally like having be able to get the ownership of my game back. Even if it's going to be in 5 years' time after everything, because with licensing deals are sort of IPs, usually it's known that you only have that license for so long. Usually, you don't have it in perpetuity. And I kind of see, that's kind of my work, and I would like to get it back at some point, even if it's, and maybe nothing will happen with it, but you're definitely getting to the point where I'm able to start reselling designs from companies that have gone out of business. You mentioned Tasty Minstrel. I had a game with them, Pioneer Days, and I'm hoping that it will be with a new publisher soon. So that it's not necessarily a lot of money, but it's still your work. So I think it's important to think about that if you can. But again, it all depends. And if it's a lot of work up front, maybe you need that upfront payment to sort of justify the time you're going to spend on it and kind of minimize your risk. Because of course, if you take royalties on a project which never exists, then you've just wasted a lot of time.
On that topic, one of the quirks of my career, and I've mentioned it before, and I'm happy to mention it again, is so I've not ever made a lot of money through game design because it's always been a secondary thing for me and whatever. But the most money I've made has been for games that never got published, and a couple of them were with Rule and Make, and they were work for hire. So they were like, we want you to make a game to do X. And then 2 of the games that I've made were with my old employer, where I just got paid my normal wage, for working in the company, but I got to work on games, like spend hundreds of hours on these games, and so I got no royalties from them, but I got to for me it was a good experience because I got to deal with the printers in China and learn a bit of that side of things, and I got to deal with other production related stuff on their kind of cost, and I got some games published, which was nice, as well. But I think it is funny that like my actual percentage of I haven't done the proper calculation, but my percentage of royalties from published games is way lower than games that never got made and no one ever saw. Like they just, the project got cancelled at some point. And but I got paid for my time every time. Like I've always been paid. Whoever has hired me has always paid me, and we've worked it out, and it's fine. But it's just I think it's something that some people may not realize as well, is that projects don't always come to fruition for heaps of reasons. It's not like there's a lot of reasons why they may not happen, and like you said, they might come back to the rights, might come back to you, and you can do something with it.
Yeah, what's the saying? For every game that you see published, there's 3 that didn't make it or something.
I didn't know. I haven't heard that saying. I believe it, but I haven't heard it. Yeah. We might take a small break, and then we'll continue this interview in a moment. So we are going to now watch a little pre-recorded ad, which is now out of date in terms of its visuals, but the information is correct because we've updated our system since I recorded it. So this is for Launch Lab. Launch Lab is our small batch print-on-demand service for tabletop games. Whether you want just 1 or 1,000, we have you covered. Select from our library of components to build your next game. We offer high-quality printing and components at a competitive price with fast production time, shipped to almost anywhere in the world. Go to launchtabletop.com to sign up for a free account and start prototyping now. Use the coupon code Materialise, that's MATERIALISE, at checkout to get 20% discount off your next order before shipping. And I've done it this time. I had my first game. I showed it last week on the stream, but I had For God's Sake, which is a prototype I'm working on, printed, and it's gorgeous. I took it to a game group, like I said. I went to this new game group on Tuesday, which was just regular gamers, not game designers, and it was they thought it was a published game. They were like the quality of the print was like so good that they thought it was. Yeah, you're muted, Alan.
You're muted, Alan. Yeah, definitely not to toot our own horn, but damn,
I'm tooting our own horn. It's
awesome.
Yeah, I'm definitely tooting our horn. Because it was my first one, and the quality of the printing and the box and everything, like it's genuinely, like I could totally imagine selling this as a retail product and not having any qualms about it. Like it's just from a quality point of view.
I'm keen to do the Pepsi Coke test with that game. So
like a mass production versus print on demand, you mean?
Yeah, print on demand, and then I will challenge anyone to try and see if they can pick out the difference. Yeah.
Hey, if you're offering to publish the game, then let's talk. We can sort that out, Alan.
Awkward
laughter because whatever, we're old friends, it's all a joke, it's fine. But actually no, sorry, the most funny part is that the core mechanic from this game, Rule and Make, did have it signed. We had it signed with you for about 4 years or something, for quite a while, and it wasn't your fault, it was me. I was never happy with the game, that's why we never brought it to market.
I remember you coming up to Gold Coast and Brisbane to actually playtest with us and Jason.
Yep.
And it was a lot of work that we put into it. I still think it's a good game, but you just were like, but there's still things that you want to tidy up. Okay.
And well, it was me. Well, we had a look. That's a whole other podcast episode is talking about that because the core mechanic I started in 2014, so it's been like 9 years of development for like the main idea, but it went in many different directions. But all of that is put aside, but to say that the printing from Launch Lab is wonderful, and I'm very excited to print more stuff through them. So that was been positive. The what am I going to say? And just a reminder for those, so we will just chuck it up on the banner as well, that if you do want to try it out, then just enter the code Materialise into checkout, and you'll get 20% off your next order before shipping.
Right. Matthew, this is a question I think could be on a lot of sort of newer designers' minds, because this is a question I think I get a lot as a publisher too. Is that for a designer, what is the expectation of involvement post sort of design when they accept it and they're sort of going into development, and what's the expectation of you to sort of be available and to do more work leading up to and also after the game is released, and what are your responsibilities as a designer or the expectations from a publisher for promoting the game or talking to the community? Like, are there any kind of codified rules or like understanding, or is that something like, okay, well, the different publishers have different expectations? And
Yeah, that is there's a lot in that question.
yes.
It was a long question.
No, I mean,
Like,
it's a lot involved, and I think, as with everything around contracts, every relationship for every game between the designer and a publisher is not unique, but it's different, and everyone has different contexts on both sides. And so I think there's no sort of one rule that will work for everything. From the designer's point of view, for designers, publishers, I would try and put as much of it in the contract as possible and make sure that everyone understands what's in the contract. Definitely as a designer, do not be worried about asking, like, I see this clause, I just don't understand it. Can you explain it to me in normal English, please? Or something like that. There's plenty of times where I've asked publishers and sometimes around some of these things about promotion or about development, because sometimes you just need to have that conversation with the publisher to just understand. Because ultimately, when you sign the contract, one of the purposes of it is just to make sure that you're all on the same page. Yes, it is to also lock in all the kind of legal requirements and payment, but it's that time when you're discussing the contract is also exactly the time when you can sound out with the publisher to make sure that you have the same idea about the game, about where you see it going, about how it's going to be developed and published. That's the time before you sign the contract to work out whether your visions kind of align. Because if you can figure that out, then I think a lot of these other problems can be avoided, or at least it'll be much easier to sort of deal with them because you've sort of had that initial kind of meeting of the minds conversation.
yeah, it's just to help set a baseline for designers. What would you think would be a reasonable expectation as a designer outside of once the game is sort of pitched? So, like, for example, it is reasonable for you to want to promote the game because it helps with royalties. Like, what should be the baseline expectations that for you? Yeah.
I actually personally think the baseline should actually be 0 actual responsibilities for the designer.
Yeah.
Now, that's not to say that there can be negotiated, that there are requirements, but I guess I see it as the designer has a very specific job, which is to design the game and present it to the publisher such that then the publisher has all the required, materials, rules, components, etc., that then they can go from that point and publish the game. Now, of course, designers often want involvement past that point, and they may want to be involved with development or want to be involved with promotion, and I think that's all perfectly understandable. But I think as a baseline, they shouldn't be required to, because I feel that is ultimately the publishers, the publisher is ultimately they're taking the financial risk to publish the game, for which, of course, the designer will be reimbursed for the design. But it's not up to the designer to do these other bits of the jobs. And one thing, especially I would say, is development, because I think promotion is a bit tricky. Realistically, like, designers can help with promotion, but I mean, most of them don't have, they don't have much more influence than the publishers do. So I find that rarely comes up as a really important point. But development is one thing. I think once the game is signed, unless that's where also the conversation should be had with publishers, saying if they're not happy with the game where it is and they feel like it has to be developed, that discussion has to be made with who is going to do that development. And, if it's the designer, are they going to be paid? Because I think this is one of the really gray areas at the moment. There are a lot of publishers, and again, I don't think it's ill will, but there are a lot of times when you'll show a game to a publisher and they'll go, oh, yep, we like X, Y, and Z, but we don't really like this. Can you work on it a bit more so that we can see it? And right there, you're already entering this kind of gray zone, because you're kind of developing the game. Because, I always think development is basically, it's sort of sculpting. You're going from sculpting the designer's vision into the publisher's vision. You're basically, metamorphosing the game into this specific product that will fit the publisher. Of course, and starting with that same game, you can develop it in lots of different ways that might fit lots of different publishers. So if you do this work to develop the game in line with what that particular publisher wants, it might not necessarily be making it a better game, if that publisher doesn't want it. Maybe you're going to have to go back to the old version to pitch it to other people. And so I'm describing a very sort of innocent kind of case, and it's very common, and I've certainly done it. But looking back in retrospect, that's already a bit of a problem, because you're asking, the designers, for the most part in the industry, do a lot of work without getting paid, and only make a bit of money, like 3 or 4 years, mostly after they've started making the game. And this is just like elongating and increasing the amount of work that they have to do. I'm perfectly happy, and sometimes, sometimes ways to deal with from a published point of view is to, sometimes I've signed like a kind of a exclusive kind of contract or something where it's like, they have 3 months to kind of like decide about the game. Basically, they pay you a fee to, maybe not very big, $500 or something like that. But basically, like, they have first rights on it for those 3 months. And they'll evaluate it. They have time to evaluate it. They can discuss with you, but they don't necessarily. Sometimes they'll pay you a development contract, which will be, here's like $1,000. Could you work on it in that direction that we want? And I feel like those are kind of the fair ways to, again, like properly pay for that kind of development time. And aside from all of that, like I really strongly believe in the value of having another developer who is not the designer working on the game. So it's also balancing that and making sure that publishers are thinking about including that in their process, I guess.
Do you have any clause? Do you have any, sorry, Alan. Do you have any clause though because I'm maybe a little bit of a control freak, and I was wondering, do you have anything in your contracts that sort of says you get to see if they are going to develop it and make changes that they don't do anything that you think is like absolutely terrible and shouldn't be in the game, like do you get or is it just sort of like once they've taken it, they just do it and that's it?
My question is actually exactly that, but I was going to bring up Relic Runners because you mentioned in one of a long time ago that you talked about this particular topic, and that in that game, and I think this is a more sort of traditional way of publishers, is that you submit the game and then what it comes back is you kind of just are surprised because some changes are made and then you won't even realize until the game is made.
I mean, in the best instance of this, I mean, Relic Runners is a good example. So it was actually a bit of a unique story in that it was pitched without me even knowing it was being pitched. That's not really the point. And I got this offer to be published out of nowhere. But from that point on, it was about, 6 months where I didn't hear anything. And then they said, oh, come to Paris and come to our offices and we'll show you what we've done with the game. And I played the kind of developed version. Of course, I recognized most of it, but they'd made some significant changes. But importantly, in that meeting, they were like, we're having this meeting so you can see the game and give us feedback and we will be receptive to that. It wasn't sort of like, this is what it is. You just have to put up with it. I think you need to have that conversation again around when you're signing the contract. You can try and find clauses which will give you, the ability to sort of approve different steps. Although and I'm a bit different. I think I'm probably really at the opposite end. I'm not much of a control freak, and I think a lot of the things, such as art, and I certainly have preferences, but I don't pretend to have any expertise or really a lot of taste in those things. And so to try and tell somebody that I could say whether I like something or not, but I don't have much expertise there. And I would say if you believe in this thing that you should not be, that the publisher's taking the risk, and therefore you shouldn't have to do more work. The flip side of that is you have to accept that you lose control over the final product. Yeah. And that's what you're signing over. That's kind of exactly what you're doing.
And you're probably right. A chunk of my thing, because my professional background is graphic design, so if I see a publisher doing something and I think that's not the right graphic design solution, it really bugs me. Like, it's like, why didn't you use a different font or different size, or the colors are off or whatever? Like, we have a couple of comments I might just bring up. So one of them is from Lee. Is it more realistic to try and negotiate a higher royalty for a great involvement in the development?
That is tricky. I think it's certainly something that if they want you to do development, I think that's one thing you can try and do, ask for a higher royalty. I would firstly try and ask to be paid a set amount as a sum, kind of work for hire effectively, only because you're again trying to mitigate your risk a little bit. Because we're talking about games never getting made. If you get a higher royalty of nothing, that doesn't help you very much.
Yeah.
Also, it doesn't provide any period of time. So it's like, well, develop for a higher royalty. Is that, for a whole year of development? Or yeah.
And it's a really tricky thing in the industry as well. I mean, this isn't really the exact topic, but development is, I think, one of the most sort of underpaid things. I've done a few small work, and these aren't really fault. Again, it's not really a fault of the publisher, because the margins are really hard in the industry, and there's not a lot of money to go around. But when you look at the amount of work that you have to do to develop a game, just the amount of time it takes to even smaller games, you have to first understand the game, because you didn't design it, so you have to kind of understand how it works. Then you have to try things and play test. You're doing as much work almost as a designer, but you're not paid anywhere near. If you mostly, they'll, it's like, oh, here's $500, to do. If you quoted an hourly rate, like most developers are getting paid very small amount for actually quite a skilled and difficult job, I think. Anyway, that was just a
Fraser has left a comment saying, I've heard of developers who received presumably much lower royalty. I believe in those cases the developers did a lot of work from the designer's game to the published game. Which is just pretty much what you were saying. I think my understanding is that developers tend to be treated more similar to like graphic designers and illustrators, where it's a bit more work for hire. They will provide a fixed kind of rate and won't necessarily get royalties. But I know obviously even with artists and graphic designers, some people do get royalties as well. Like there's a lot of options, but my understanding is it's normally more a fixed kind of cost.
But unfortunately, there's not a lot of information about how much to pay developers. Unlike, I don't know graphic designers and artists as much, but there's a little bit more sort of like, you kind of know what your rates are usually as an artist, right? But if I would perchance, like, the amount that you really should get paid as an hourly rate as a developer is something that would never be paid, mostly just because it can't be afforded, which is understandable.
Yes.
But, yeah.
So I have a question I don't actually know the answer to. I'm curious to ask, because
It's good to ask that question.
Well, the thing is, I don't think anyone's sort of hit on this topic before. I don't think. So you design the game. Say that the design went through a significant amount of development, and that both the designer and the publisher is really happy with the end result, but the amount of development would probably rival in terms of effort as the design, right? So let's just say that that's the scenario. So the game is published, it did quite well, and then after 5 years or 3 years, you get the design back. Do you have the right as a designer to the design of your game, or inclusive of the development that was done by the publisher, you get that too?
Yeah, it's true. That is actually quite tricky. I mean, it's in this particular instance because you're involving that developer, really. I definitely know instances where developers have been added as effectively designers on the box because they've worked so much, and sometimes that has actually caused problems with the original designer. I come from a science background where the idea is you sort of add everybody on a scientific paper to do any work. I really believe in, like, put as many names on the box as you want, because there's a lot of people who contributed.
Yeah, there's names on a
really
box,
tricky,
but then
though.
there's like, who has the rights to that design when it reverts? That's tricky.
Because once you have it and you sell it to another publisher, the other publisher goes, yeah, well, we want that game that was published, that version, and then you go, well.
But that's not the game you pitched, because
but
it's
wouldn't
much.
but couldn't you use the analogy with graphic design and illustrators and artists, the same thing as saying if in the contract the original game designer is also getting all the artwork and everything that was put in by the publisher as part of that deal, when it reverts to them, then the developer would be treated the same, right? Like, because
that's if you have that clause, of course.
That's right.
That's maybe something important to have.
Yeah, but if you don't have that clause, for me, my brain, I would treat it similar to the other work for hire roles that have gone into the making of the game, and either have them specified or not.
I guess.
Well, and you don't own them, right?
Yeah, I guess similar in that when, as a publisher, you sign a game and then you you do that further development, you art direct it, you apply art, all of that kind of stuff. When the design reverts, the art doesn't necessarily revert to the designer. So
That's
unless
right,
there's
yeah.
some clause that would do that, but the expectation is never that the art that the publisher paid for just magically goes to the designer when the game reverts. So
No, it has to be
perhaps
definitely
it's
a contractual
it's in a
agreement. Yeah, yeah.
similar
Has
vein,
this
but it's
question
still
ever been
difficult.
raised before? In like in the industry, I'm sure. Like,
Yeah. Well, I can speak from our experience, Alan, where we've signed a game that has a really great core concept, and the amount of development work that we've done on the game has basically
significant.
transformed it into a different game at that point. That there was no friction there really. It's just that like thinking about it after the fact, like the game we signed and the game we published ostensibly are very different games, other than this sort of like a thread that flows through them. Where do rights and ownership
Yeah.
fall after the fact?
I'm gonna put a pin on this because this is a big tangent, which I think we can get
It
lost
is a
in. And
big
we've
tangent.
got
Sorry.
we've got about 10 minutes left of the
Again,
show.
I'm the one that
and
throws in the chaos.
No, that's okay. What we can add this to our list that is all in my head. I haven't written anything down of possible topics for the future to try and
It's a good one,
talk about
though,
again.
I think. Yeah.
But yeah, definitely. So I just want to have a couple of questions that do relate more to the finance stuff back on our original topic, just before we wrap up. One thing I noticed, Matt, reading the 2021 and 2022 results was there was a significant jump in your earnings. You listed around €44,000 in 2021 and then about €114,000 in 2022. Is that just because more games came out and it was just like a natural result of things that had already been in the works for a while, or was there some other factor that because that's a huge increase, right, in income?
Well, I mean, everything in game design is sort of delayed. I think, and maybe it's actually something I didn't make clear enough in the threads, is that, like when you get paid a certain amount in a year, it doesn't really correlate to the work you did in the year. It's just sort of how things, obviously sometimes you're getting some royalties from games 5 years ago, 1 year ago, 2 years ago. I think there was a bit of accounting weirdness, which probably meant that some money, which realistically should have counted in the 2021 got counted in 2022 because of just stupid tax things. So there was a bit of that, but also, I think the big difference for me was Echoes, this new game series with Ravensburger. That those payments started coming in 2022 and they weren't in 2021. That was probably one big difference in terms of, because it's now my highest earning game. So that made a big difference. But it's with all these things that sort of if as games you could be very fortunate. I consider myself extremely fortunate because you do if you get to this point, you are benefiting and even compounding in terms of benefits without necessarily doing more work. It's your kind of earnings aren't tied to the amount of time you spend at your desk, kind of thing. But of course, again, this is years after the fact, getting to this point.
Yeah. No, it's interesting. Jay's just written a question, which I'll ask because I think it's a good one. I know that Matt, you've done a lot of co-designs. I think you've even mentioned that's pretty much all of your games co-designs, basically. Yeah,
not all, but 90%. Yeah.
The 90%, and I know that we've had other guests on as well. Like we've had John Gilmore on, who's similar. Like nearly everything most things are co-designs, and it seems to be that co-designing is a really good way to, I guess, produce a lot of work and you can bounce off other people and whatever you're like the person you're working with. Jay's question is, I have a co-designer question. Do you set up a business with a co-designer, or do you just get paid separately from a publisher?
You just get paid separately. So in the contract, it should say you have a single contract for both of you, your co-licensees. Yes, licensees. And you say that you split the payments 50-50. And then the publisher should pay you separately, effectively. You'll invoice for your 50% within whatever structure that you're set up as a designer. There's no need to set up a business with your co-designer. And it would get very complicated if you had lots of co-designers, as I do.
So in terms of re-signing, then, if you were to re-sign the game, then it would have to be a consensus between the two. So one says yes, the other one says no, then you can't go ahead, right?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, everything's always 50. That's the other thing about co-design I really strongly believe is it always has to be 50-50 or like the even split. If it's 3 designers, 33. There's no sense of trying to like split it 60-40 because you did a bit more
51-49.
work, or because it just is sort of. I've had definitely had questions over time, which is like, oh, I feel like I did this work, or no, it's ultimately it's very hard to, especially anything creative, it's hard to sort of say what was the time spent equal to the product or whatever. Everything's just 50-50. And if you start designing with someone else, and you should make that very clear when you start. I mean, I'm not saying it should be the first conversation, especially if you're kind of new designers. You don't want to go like, oh, let's sign this thing, but fairly early on, you should have a really clear understanding of if you were to publish this or if you were to sign it, what would be the expectations on that.
Do you think that publishers would be less enthusiastic compared to signing with a single party versus signing to two parties? Are there any kind of like, yeah, that's annoying? Or do you think that that's not even something that publishers ever really rarely consider?
No, I don't think it's a huge issue. I think they're more concerned about, if it's one or two, but it doesn't matter. Are you, easy to work with? Do you answer emails? Do you, and sometimes two people, and the only thing I think sometimes that can be a bit useful is if you have one of the two people be the kind of lead person in like answering emails, but that's just more a practicality thing. It doesn't matter who really, like you could switch it between you two, but it just in terms of it's just a bit easier to manage.
As well as like because as you say, when you have more parties, then decisions become more complicated. So conflict resolution, when you have like a change that is being issued by the publisher, one agrees, the other one doesn't, that can be annoying.
I've actually just been really, I think all I would say is that if you are someone who co-designs, I think you have to understand that you kind of have to hold your designs quite lightly. I mean, even if you're a sole designer, I think it's good to practice that, getting better at what Eris to say, because ultimately a published game is a product of many people, and you have to understand, like once you sign it over, you are losing ownership of it. You can try and control it, but you've just got once the game is released, then the players are going to change it and it becomes a thing of its own again. I think it's not required, but it's very useful, I think, if you want to keep going in the industry, to have a pretty light ownership of things, and I think that helps with things like conflict resolution. Like I like to think I'm pretty easygoing in those kind of things, and I'll just sort of go with whatever's best, that will move the project forward and get it completed.
We're going to do one more question each because we're getting close to our hour and we need to do our magical world famous questionnaire. My last question for you, Matt. So Alan and Alana, if you can think of your last question. My last question is, how do you, if other people are working on the game, like developers, the publisher, and whatever, and the game's getting then published into the wild, and then players are reviewing it, making either publicly or privately with their friends, and they're giving feedback, and some of them will say this game sucks, this game's amazing, this game does this right, these other things wrong, whatever, like all that stuff. I struggle with like some mental health issues, and part of that manifests in a way of like, they're kind of almost like telling me I'm not very good, or I've done a poor job, or whatever. How do you manage those feelings if people are talking about your game when you may not have even done the change? Like it might have been a publisher introduced change, or it might be a graphic design thing that you had no, say in at all. Like, does any of that affect you at all, or how do you cope with any of that, or anything like that?
I think it definitely does. I can read something in the morning and it will kind of set me off. But I will hold it even sort of subconsciously. I've definitely found that. I mean, and I don't think it's particularly new advice, but there is a kind of a bias towards negative information, and we hold that. And I think, especially with board games, you just forget all the kind of positive things. You read that one bad review, and then so I find it quite useful. I mean, it sounds a little bit self-indulgent, but I do go back to some of my games and I just read the comments, and you realize like, oh, there's lots of nice things being said about the game. I do sort it from normally the top rated down, so I don't tend to read the bottom comments. But it just reminds you that there are people out there who are playing your game and enjoying it. And I try to focus on it. It's not perfect. I don't think there's a foolproof way when you read something that is sort of like especially I find it's very hard when someone's played something wrong or they've kind of obviously missed something, and I'm just like, oh, that you've kind of, but that's with a bit of perspective and also time, you realize that it's not necessarily your fault, but it's not the player's fault either, because something has failed in the pipeline of getting them to understand how to play the game, or to that they've just done the best they can in terms of playing the game and reaching a good conclusion. So but it's not easy.
No, it's a good perspective though. Yeah. But I think what you said also is, and I think this applies to like musicians and people who make movies and people who write books, is like kind of once it is out in there and you've got people engaging with it, it sort of isn't totally yours anymore, is it? Like it is partly theirs by the nature of them, their relationship to it. Yeah, interesting.
Especially in games, because it's a type of art where it doesn't really exist until the consumers actually start playing it or kind of creating it. Like as a box, it doesn't do anything, So
Alan, do you have one more question?
I do. I was going to throw you another curveball, but I know that's just going to prolong the
another rabbit hole.
Yeah, another rabbit hole. So I'll sort of make it a little more sort of personal to you. So out of the catalog of games that you've published, is there one that you think that hasn't really been hadn't gotten its fair amount of share of like attention that it should, because it's actually a really good game, or you personally feel like it's a really good game, but maybe it was published at the wrong time, or that people just sort of didn't pick it up, but if they did, they'll realize that this is what is the unsung hero game in your list that you kind of want to sort of signal boost to say, actually, check this game out because it's my personal favorite, and I think it's people haven't given it the attention it needed. Yeah.
That's a really good question, actually. You should ask that to most designers. I think that's a very good question. Probably Costa Rica. So it was a game published by Mayfair Lookout. Well, Mayfair still existed back in, 2015, 2016. And it's a sort of a family style game, a bit of push your luck, but with a spatial element. So there's a board and you're trying to pick up animals and you're flipping over tiles, but it has this also really interesting shared that you're in groups of people, and each turn one player is moving a group of people around, and any person in that group can decide to take the tiles for themselves. So you're sort of playing the players off each other. But it's a fairly simple game, kind of very Spiel des Jahres, and I feel like it's close to like one of, if you want to use the word like elegant or something like that, like few rules, but really fun interaction. So, very interactive, maybe more interactive than most games I've made. And I know there are some people who really like it, but it just didn't, for whatever reason, it just didn't. I think, ultimately it probably needed a better presentation than the kind of Lookout Mayfair, like the
style.
It's the Clemens Franz look. And, I love Clemens and he's incredibly talented, but it probably didn't suit this game. Ultimately, it was a bit more, so actually it reminds me I should try and that would be one I would definitely try and show to publishers now. Maybe I would change it a little bit it can be a little bit unforgiving in terms of the luck, but I wouldn't change much about it.
But you have the rights to that game?
It's a good question. Yeah, it's funny we talk about getting rights back, but even that is a complicated question sometimes, because it requires sometimes publishers to say that they haven't sold so many in a particular year, and then you have to work out, these things about artwork that sometimes you really need the artwork to make a sense. For example, a lot of players have talked about Elysium, and are we ever going to see more content for it or another expansion? That's been a sort of ongoing thing as well. So yeah, it's not straightforward. But actually with Costa Rica, I don't know whether we have the rights back, basically.
Alana, last question.
Nothing that should open too much of a can of worms. I will say Elysium's one of my favorite games.
Thank you. That's very
and but yeah, I guess thinking about you as an Aussie game designer, and you transplanted yourself overseas for a while, and do you find that being in UK and Czech Republic and that, like in Europe, how has that helped you as a designer in terms of your growth as in the industry? Not being in Australia, is that a part of your kind of strategy?
Well, it certainly wasn't part of a strategy. I feel a bit of a fraud to be called an Australian designer, to be honest, because I haven't, I haven't really had a game released while I've been living in Australia. I basically moved and then it sort of happened to me. I went to one protospiel in Sydney before I left, and I tried to set up a playtest group in Sydney, like 30 years ago. It didn't quite work. No, I think it had it's hard to tell whether, there are some parts that happen in my sort of designing career in terms of finding a good group, finding good people to work with. And that's not specific to being outside Australia, but I happened to find it outside Australia. I went to Cambridge when I moved to the UK, and that of a particular, it's a university city, it's reasonably small, but it has a really big turnover in terms of lots of different people from all around the world coming there regularly. There's a certain percentage of people in academia like games that they kind of go a little bit hand in hand sometimes. So it turned out just to be a really perfect place to meet people and process. And I'm not saying you couldn't find it in Australia, but it just happened for me. But in other instances, yes, being in Europe was a huge advantage. Being able to go to Essen, actually, I would say probably more cheaply than I will go to even going to CanCon, probably. I don't exactly know, but I think would have been on the same level cost as me, taking a fairly cheap flight from the UK to Germany, staying in Germany, and, going to Spiel sort of thing. So, and I got to go there, 11, 12 times when I was over Europe. And as a designer, you can't substitute that for anything. Being able to meet with publishers so regularly and get to know them, get to see all the games, getting to meet other designers, it was so important. And actually on a slightly smaller scale, like other things like UK Games Expo and Cannes in France, like being able to also go to those, which are also like lots of really huge events, which just mean that it just accelerates how much you can learn, how many people you can meet. Again, meeting publishers regularly really makes a difference. You get to form relationships with them. Not necessarily that they're going to like favor you and somehow pick your games, but it means that you can just understand more of what they're looking for, and you can build that rapport, which, it's all these small things that you don't know what in the end exactly leads to you making a connection, being able to make a game with a publisher, but they do all add into that. So it is a real disadvantage for Australians, absolutely, in terms of just the lack of being able to go to these bigger conventions, have real contact with the bigger publishers in the industry who have more capacity to publish more games. And when they do, they have the possibility of being bigger releases and large successes. It's not to say that there are other ways to approach it, I'm hoping there are great members of the Australian community, and I'm a strong believer you don't need a big community necessarily. You only, like, for a good playtesting group, you only need 2 people really, if you're both kind of like on the same level. So it's not that it can't be done, but it's a lot harder and it's a lot costlier, and everyone's just a lot farther away from each other. And so that's something I'm gonna have to kind of see. I mean, of course, I'm really lucky because I'm kind of starting from it's so different starting from my position.
That's right.
No,
Yeah,
exactly.
you already have relationships. Yeah.
Do you think for Aussie designers that are, realistically sort of they're looking to make a career or break into the industry in some larger way, do you think even like a single trip to Essen is fruitful as a designer, like to kind of plan out a trip to Essen?
If you could do it, yes, I think so. I think if you were careful in how you planned it in terms of, getting, setting up meetings, as many meetings you can, trying to really talk to people like myself. I'm always open to be contacted if anyone has any questions, like how to kind of best leverage that opportunity. Then yes, it's quite expensive. And I think I don't know how I would deal with having to make that investment at the same point of my career. But if you are serious about it, I think it's pretty good money. And the only other thing is that you only have to meet these publishers once to form a relationship. I really believe in most professional relationships, it really helps if you meet face to face just once, but then almost everything by then can be done digitally to varying success. But there are other things in the US which may or may not be cheaper. You can look at Gen Con's another instance. I personally just prefer it. I think there's a lot more publishers. It's more international, I think. So those UK Games Expo is another thing, which is maybe a little bit cheaper, but also quite large. There's a really good community there as well. And also, I guess
I've heard Gamma in the US is pretty good as well for meeting publishers.
yeah, I've never been to Gamma actually. Yeah, it's more of a like a retailer trade thing. So I think there would be a lot of publishers there. You just might not meet as many designers kind of on the side, which might not be that important. But
for some reason I got the impression there was a pretty big designer community that went there. But
there is. There's definitely a lot of designers that go to Gamma. The focus is a little bit different because it is a trade show. But definitely, business is still done at Gamma. Absolutely.
But I guess the only thing to kind of end this point with the Australian thing is I hope, and I'm not saying that I'm going to change everything, but I really am quite serious about people reaching out, and I really think a small amount of information experience can go a long way in helping a community. And I saw this in Cambridge. We had a really fertile group of designers, and it was because there were a few people like myself who just knew a few things, could point out a few contacts, and I think it makes a big difference. And I'm just hoping that, I know it's a bit harder in terms of meet people in Australia, but I hope I can help in some way. And for me, it's very easy to give a contact or to help someone. So don't be shy. Don't feel I'm just a regular person just wanting to help. So, as much as I can.
No, you're Matthew Dunstan. That's not a regular person.
No, it's all a bit weird. Well, I'm still Australian in that thing. I can't handle the whole it's tall poppy syndrome or something. We can't stand
it's
out
all
too
good.
much.
I'm definitely winding you up a bit. You've always been so down to earth in all of our interactions. It's been wonderful. But I think though, to your point, one thing I really love about the Australian game design community in terms of both the online, so the main group is Tabletop Game Designers Australia, but then also just meeting at events, is that on the whole, people do really want to support each other and see everyone succeed. And so people are generous with their time, both playtesting, but also just advice and contacts. Like, I know I've been given contacts to people to chase up, and I've given other contacts to other people to chase up. And I think it definitely is a really healthy community. And so it's one that I'm very happy to be a part of. So yeah, it's happening, I hope, and if not, we'll just keep talking it up until it happens more. What we need in Australia is just more publishers. That's our problem here. We don't have enough publishers. So hey, if we can get
sorry, and we contributed to -1.
Well, no, it's back to 0. You haven't you created
Depends on
one.
when you're counting.
Yeah, you didn't take someone else down with you.
Not that you know.
All right. Well, on that really good ending. We do have one. Let me just check a sec. Yeah. Okay. Well, I'm going to leave the comments because there's a few comments coming in, but I think now we're over time, so we might just leave them for now. But I encourage people to read the comments on YouTube if you want to engage in more conversation. Okay. So we're going to move to our world famous Materialise questionnaire. So, Matthew, this is 5 questions that we, as both Launch Tabletop and all of our people who are with us watching the episode, we will judge you very heavily by your answers to these. So this will define your reputation going forward
Scientifically
in the industry.
proven. Yeah.
It is definitely. So, the first question is, are you more of a heart, a diamond, a club, or a spade?
Goodness me. I'll say a spade, but that's purely sort of aesthetically. I can't. I'm sorry. There's some sort of abstract gap in my head to be able to take the cards into anything more. Sorry.
Fair
Totally
enough.
valid.
That's right. So you're very useful because spades are kind of useful to kind of in
Well,
the garden
no,
and
I'm
stuff,
not useful at all. I'm not.
Oh,
I'm
you're not useful.
I'm not like a negative. I'm not sort of stopping usefulness happening, but I don't contribute much to it either.
Oh, brilliant. All right, question 2. Dinosaurs who are pirates or robots who are ghosts?
Let's say dinosaurs who are pirates, just because I think it would be somewhat comical to see a dinosaur with a tiny little hat. But
I I agree.
again, I think purely on the aesthetics rather than any sort of meaningful understanding
And
of
I've
what
said
that
it-
would
I've-
mean for humanity.
I've said it before, but I still would love to do a game which has this kind of theme, and I really want a T-Rex as the captain, or sorry, as the person steering the ship, trying to steer the ship with their tiny arms and having to like have some kind of contraption to make that possible.
But I guess
'cause they
Smash
can't
Up
reach
does
it.
this already in a way, right? In a way.
Oh, well, sort of, but I mean, they're not actually pirate dinosaurs, right? They're just the smashed up decks. Come on, that's lame. It's not lame. It's a good game, but like it's lame for this. We want something
All right,
customized and real.
Okay.
All right. Question number 3. What's your favorite snack or drink when playing a tabletop game?
Water. I always forget to drink water, and anytime I don't drink enough water, I think back and I should have drunk more water. So water.
That is a very good,
Very
sensible answer.
practical.
Yeah. Question number 4. Cards or dice?
Cards. At my heart, I am still, a Magic the Gathering player, and if I look at all my favorite games, they're all Innovation, Race to the Galaxy. It's all card games basically. So I think I have to say cards.
Fair
And also, I
enough.
grew up playing traditional card games. That was because also, I mean, everyone here might know the game 500, for example, the traditional card game.
We still play that every day.
Yeah.
I'm very jealous of you because it is probably one of my favorite games. But it's weirdly enough, I didn't know this before I moved overseas. It is almost uniquely Australian, even though it wasn't invented in
Ah.
Australia. It's nobody in Europe really
interesting.
knows of it. And
Yeah,
it was so-
I did a little bit of a deep dive on this thing, but yeah, Australia is definitely it's a cultural phenomena for it's a culture it's a game that everyone plays here, but there are like the Europe has their own slightly different rules. Australia has again slightly different rules to America as well. So there's 3 official flavors of 500, but yeah, we are by far the most played, the highest player base.
I miss it. Especially, I love 5-player 500. I'm not sure if anyone's played a lot of
Ooh.
5-player.
No.
500.
I've only played 500 a couple of times. I'm now feeling distinctly not Australian. I'm going to have to lift my 500
So
game.
well, this is in 5 players. You don't know who your partners are, and you bid for a card when you bid.
Wow.
So
Okay.
and if you win the bid, whoever has that card becomes your partner, but you don't know until the card is played who your partner is, and everyone scores individually.
How interesting.
There's another game
Okay.
that's like that too, more recently.
Yeah, I'm sure they're probably. Yeah, I think I do remember seeing something, but yeah, check out
Cahoots
500.
or something like that. I forget.
Could
Yeah.
be.
Yeah.
Yeah, and sometimes if you can call a card that you have yourself, and then you go it alone, and you get double
Yeah.
points.
Yeah,
Oh,
that sounds
wow.
amazing.
Cool.
Yeah.
Okay. So what I'm hearing is that Matthew and Alan are going to start a 500 convention for Australia. Where it's just a
Oh, that would be
championship
amazing.
league or something.
I already have my conventions in my house. I would do it every night. Yeah.
There you go. Awesome. All right. Last question. Question number 5. What fictional character would you invite to a game night?
This is where I reveal how little I've kind of read or seen recently in terms of. I'm not a big like I have to admit, for example, I've not watched a single Marvel thing ever, like basically.
Oh, wow.
So
That's actually impressive more than anything else, I'd say.
yeah.
Considering
two
there's
of
like
them-
20 something or like heaps of
No,
them.
I know. So I don't. Oh gosh, damn it! I should remember. There must be something I like.
Just
I do
pick one
read
of the
books.
Greek gods from Elysium.
But are they fictional? That's the question. No, it's
True.
oh,
good
God.
point.
Fudge. I don't. Sorry, I've just gone completely blank.
All right, then I'll rephrase it. I'll
Let's say
rephrase it
Gandalf.
for you,
I'll take
Matt.
Gandalf. It's such a terrible answer, but
Gandalf.
no, I would want to take an author personally, like someone like Sarah Douglas, who unfortunately isn't around anymore. She was an Australian fantasy writer.
Oh.
I loved her books, and I would have loved to have met her.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a good answer. Cool, not fictional, but that's fine. We had
Not
on our
fictional,
very
yeah.
first episode. Well, I think it was on our very first episode. Kate answered the question and was like, "I just want to invite my friends, like the friends who I don't see often enough." It's like, yeah, fair. I know we all want that, but we want this. Anyway, all right. Well, thank you, Matt. I'm going to move into the ending of the episode now. Yeah, thanks again for being here and just answering all these questions and chatting about all this stuff. I will absolutely reach out to you in the future and have you back on, maybe in a few months' time or next year or something, and we can do a follow up and just see how things are going. Maybe we revisit in 12 months' time the 2023 financial stuff or something. But as Alan has pointed out, there's a whole lot of other topics that we can talk with you, and development is definitely an interesting one.
We forgot to talk about
Postmark, we didn't. I'm about to bring it up now. So, but we didn't actually bring it up in the main conversation. You're right. There's a whole other game. You got a whole company there called Postmark Games.
You see, I'm terrible, but I'm only good at designing, not self-promotion. So I forgot to talk about the thing that would probably be good to talk about.
That's fair enough. So Postmark Games, maybe do you want to give us the elevator pitch for Postmark Games, or give us some description about it?
We make print-at-home games. We've got 2 games out so far, Voyages and Aquamarine. And you can go to our website and get them right now. You just download the files. They cost £4 each, which we think is a pretty good deal. Voyages now has 5 maps and a campaign mode. And once you buy any of the games, you get everything we ever release for the game into the future for free all the time. So check it out. And it's with Rory Muldoon, who's incredibly talented game designer and graphic designer based in the UK.
Fantastic, and the link is postmarkgames.com. Now, people can follow you on Twitter, which we put up before, which is just @wisegoldfish or twitter.com/wisegoldfish. And I highly recommend that if you're interested in reading Matt's breakdowns for the earnings and the royalties, that's really good. But also just in general, it's good to follow him. He is a good person. Then also, to get in touch with Matthew, it's your email address, which is m.t.dunstan@gmail.com. And you've already said a few times before, Matt, that you're open to people sending you questions.
Absolutely.
And things, so,
I can't promise that I will always have enough time to completely help, but please do get in contact. I'll do my best.
That's so generous of you. That genuinely is. It's a really good thing.
Matt, can you help finishing my game? I'll just give it to you and you can take it.
I'll try. That's a dangerous thing to say a yes to blindly. I can look at the game.
Look, I'll give you an advance of $5. All right, $5 advance, and then we're fine. The one thing I think is fairly consistently true though is that the board game community is very helpful, and you're obviously offering to help people, and a lot of people are through whatever their capacity is, are very generous with their time and giving advice, and there's a lot of good Facebook groups and Twitter threads and all that kind of stuff. It's very cool. Thank you, Alan, for being on the show, and thank you, Alana.
Good to be back.
Yeah, I mean, Alan, it's only been a couple of weeks, but Alana, you've been a number of weeks, and so it's really good to have you back. Thank you very much for everyone who's been in the comments and been watching along. If you are watching this on YouTube, then if you could please give us a subscribe and a like, that would be really helpful. And you'll also get notified then if you when we upload new videos or when we're about to go live. Same as if you're following us on Facebook, then you can look for us there. And I don't know, do we have any banners for all these things? I'm not even doing my job very well, am I? Where are we? No, we don't really have banners for anything because I'm terrible. If you, though, want to follow along for general Launch Tabletop stuff, then go to launchtabletop.com, and that's also where you can sign up to check out Launch Lab, which is our print-on-demand board game service. And we are also now introducing Stella, which is a different... do you have an elevator pitch for Stella, Alan or Alana? No, putting you on the spot.
It's good.
It's good. Currently, so I'll do the elevator pitch. Currently, it's in a initial phase where we're taking expressions of interest. So if you log into your Launch Tabletop account, in the app window, there's a Stella tab. You click on that, put in your email address, and then you'll be able to express interest in it. The main function of it is that it was initially creating metal prints, but then in the future other products which can use the artwork that you've already got from your games, whether it's the box art or the actual box design itself or other key pieces of art, and you can give your customers more access to the worlds that you've created, and I think it's really good for both the customer and for people that want beautiful prints on their wall. I've got a little mini one here, which is an Ian O'Toole design, which is lovely. and there's like a metal print thing. It's very cool. So Stellars, if you do have assets and you are a publisher or a designer who's also published, then go check out Stellar. We also have our Discord. So if you want to chat with us about game design or about production, or talk to us about Launch Lab and Stellar or anything else, then head to ltt.ltd/s/discord, and we would love to chat with you there. You can also send an email through to support@launchtabletop.com if you have any questions. We do have a Stellar link. I just found it. I didn't realize it was there. And it is app.launchtabletop.com/Stellar/EOI, which is expression of interest. So if you are interested in talking about Stellar or finding out more about it, then head there. And for Launch Lab, just a reminder that if you do want to try out Launch Lab, it's free, completely free to sign up and plug in your game, design to kind of get an idea of how it fits with what we offer. But if you do then decide to proceed with an order, put in the code Materialise, and you'll get 20% off before shipping. That's all that stuff done, and Materialise is produced by Launch Tabletop, and we've already done the visit our link, so I've all done all that stuff. I'm Eris, and I've been your host, and I've been joined by Matthew, Alana, and Alan. Thank you, everyone. And I will just say, after we do our outro, if everyone can stay on the line, we have some technical stuff to sort out. I'm just going to mention that now because I think it should be mentioned. And thank you again for everyone. So goodbye.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks,
Matt.